Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's start our video with a story about how a simple misunderstanding with a new neighbor led to some creative and petty revenge. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button, smash the like if you enjoy the content, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a juicy story. Neighbor won't even face in my direction, so I made sure he's the one feeling left out. Met my next door neighbor the day we moved into rental house. It's a nice neighborhood, so I can only imagine having a rental property isn't popular. I figured that going in and planned to go out of our way to be good, responsible, and quiet neighbors and to make friends if we could. We complimented their freshly laid sod, which was being put in by landscapers while we chatted. It was clearly a big deal to him by how he talked about his yard. 2 days later, I accidentally rolled onto the edge of his grass while trying to back out and return our moving truck. It bunched up a piece of sod, but did virtually no damage. Didn't even create a divot in the dirt. Before I was even out of the truck, he screamed something and slammed the door behind him. I knocked until he answered, admitted the error, and offered to pay the landscaping bill to have it repaired, even though simply pushing the sod back into place and adding some water would have made it good as new. He said he'd send me the bill and shut the door in my face. No bill because, surprise, there was no damage. But nonetheless, he started treating us like we ran over his grandmother. Not only does he refuse to talk to us, he'll even go as far as turning 180 so not to face in our direction if we drive by. Ridiculous. Now, honestly, he's putting in way more effort to avoid us than we even care about his approval in the first place. So really, joke's on him to begin with. But it's about the principle of the thing. Cue petty revenge. When we first met, he had said Halloween was a big deal in our neighborhood. I bought king-size candy bars just on the chance he'd be told or hear how great our house was for having them. I made Christmas gifts for 3 neighbors on both sides, and these guys to be polite, and delivered them to introduce ourselves. Then we had every one of our other neighbors over for dinner. It's a very close neighborhood, so when they inevitably talk about us, it'll always be brought up how we had them over. Just a matter of time before he'll have to explain why. I also befriended his wife, and now we go on dog walks together every week. Since I had a group chat to give them both my number when we moved in, I use it to coordinate when we're meeting. He may not have anything to do with us directly, but I'll be damned if it's not going to be as difficult as possible for him. I've got big plans for a neighborhood barbecue this summer. That should really be a riot. The old kill them with kindness maneuver. Beautifully done. Especially the going on walks with their wife. And our second story. Do nothing all night for a ton of OT? Yep, why not? Little bit of backstory. I worked at the time in an oil change place. They'd recently moved managers from salary to hourly because some managers in different cities were just lying and not going to work while getting the same check every payday. And I warned them that if anything, my pay was going to go way up because I'm here a lot more than 40 hours a week. They were good with that, they said. Well, one night I get a call at 7 p.m., 2 hours after close, from one of my guys who was in the shop after hours without permission and crashed into a bay door. Like a garage door, all auto shops have at least a few. He got fired. That's not the MC at all, just set up. So I came in and investigated. The most relevant fact here was that he bent the door so there was maybe a 4-inch by 4-inch gap. A house cat could have squeezed through. I called our door repair guys immediately. They said their folks were on an emergency after-hours call already to somewhere 5 hours away. They could be there in the morning. I said, okay, this wasn't a danger. The door was in place, not visible from the street. You'd have to be behind our building looking for this kind of thing to find it. Alarm still sets, motion detectors still work. Anyone that broke in through this metal door with a 4-inch gap would have needed tools and was going to get in even without the gap. We don't even keep more than $100 cash around, and anything expensive to steal was equipment bolted to the floor. Deal with it tomorrow, right? Obviously no. Called my boss to fill him in, and he said to call the door guys. I told him I already did and tried to explain their situation. He interrupted and told me in a super rude and loud words, this D-head did not like being called after work or having to do any work ever, just to call them and not bother him about it again. Then he texted me to rudely say I better damn well stay there until they arrive and finish the repair. So since I was single, had no plans, and was now paid hourly, I clocked in the instant I arrived initially. I decided this sounded like easy money. Pulled up 2 comfy office chairs to make a bed/couch, watched YouTube and did assorted internet scrolling, slept at normal times pretty comfortably all the way to 8 a.m. They showed up around 9 and fixed the problem pretty quickly. I was already on my regularly scheduled 8 to 5 shift that day, which I finished. So now let's do the math. That overnight waiting, 7 p.m. to 8 a.m., 13 hours, all OT at time and a half. Then my normal shift, 9 hours, all at time and a half. So 22 hours times 1.5 equals 33 hours of pay for doing my normal shift, plus internet scrolling and napping that was barely even an inconvenience. My boss sees it come payday and tries to give me a yelling over email for trying to rip off the company, CCing all the big bosses, HR, payroll, etc. I reply to all, explain the situation, include the text screenshot. Suddenly, I'm not the one getting yelled at anymore, and I got every bit of that OT pay. As soon as money starts to get involved when it doesn't need to be, there always conveniently seems to suddenly be a misunderstanding of some kind when their bosses notice and start asking questions. And our next story. When the perfect opportunity for payback arises, take it. This happened towards the end of my decade in the pizza industry. I was working as the general manager of a pizza place that loves the letter H and alliteration. A little backstory is needed to truly understand the climax of this story. As general manager, I was paid salary, meaning I was paid the same amount every week regardless of the hours I put in. I was expected to work at least 50 hours per week, including mandatory closing on Sunday nights because inventory was due. This was awful as an NFL fan. Working less than 60 hours was considered lazy by the district manager and wasn't worth the butt-chewing that followed every week. This particular day was New Year's Eve, which fell on a Tuesday, and while most holidays increase revenue by a good bit, it was a Tuesday night, and that was my only guaranteed day off every week due to my shift managers having school schedules that I agreed to work around because they were good shift managers. So I write the schedule and have not one but both of my shift leaders working that day along with all my drivers and my best inside crew to handle the bump in sales. I trained my crew to run like a well-oiled machine so that on my 1 or maybe 2, if I'm lucky, days off each week, I could trust that the store would run without me. So the stage is set. New Year's Eve, Tuesday morning, I'm on the couch with my roommate/best friend Rick playing video games when we both receive an email from our district manager. At this point, I should point out that Rick is also a general manager for the same company at a different location. This email from the district manager flat out stated that all general managers were required to work from 8 a.m. to close, regardless of the already approved schedules he'd reviewed the previous week. Obviously, I'm pissed, and so is Rick, since we both schedule in a similar fashion, giving ourselves the slowest day of the week off. Despite being royally pissed, we both get dressed and head to our respective stores. After a few hours of sitting around waiting for the holiday rush to hit, I realized that this job is not worth the 70-plus hours a week I regularly commit to it. I draft up a resignation email to my district manager, and I'm a moments away from clicking send when I get a phone call. It's Rick, and he's happy. Why, you might ask? Rick tells me that he's just quit and is leaving his store to fend for itself. This only strengthens my resolve, and instead of an email, I call my district manager directly. He answers and is audibly flustered by the news of one of his store managers quitting on New Year's Eve. Much to my satisfaction, I hit him with the news that I too will be leaving immediately and never coming back. I don't quite remember exactly what he said, but the panic in his voice was so satisfying to hear. So Rick and I went to our favorite bar, ate wings, and drank beer without a care in the world for the first time in months. The fallout to my store was minimal. As I mentioned before, the store was effective without me and could run pretty well without my direct supervision. Rick's store, on the other hand, was a different story. His decision to quit caused a chain reaction, and more than half of the employees quit immediately after finding out that their beloved leader had abandoned ship. One of Rick's employees, who's still our friend to this day, relayed a tale of 3+ hour delivery times, pissed off customers, and a district manager who ended up working open to close shifts at Rick's store for the better part of 2 weeks while he shuffled managers around and tried to find replacements for us both. Moral of the story is, be bothered to see what your people are doing and then don't F them over. especially if you rely on them to have your job or sanity. And our last story. Sheriff neighbor trespassing my property. We bought our home 2 years ago and moved in next door to an extremely rude family. Shortly after we purchased the property, the neighbor behind us put up a fence. We hadn't moved in yet, so we never knew he had plans to do this, and he didn't ask us to pitch in for the cost, even though our properties back into each other. Visiting would mean walking around the block, which we just haven't done. About a week ago, I noticed that half of our neighbor's fence was painted. He didn't give us a heads up that he'd be coming into our property to do this, which seemed odd. It's one thing to paint a fence, but another to just walk onto someone's property without permission. My husband and I were taken aback by this blatant trespassing, especially since it happened without any warning or courtesy notification. Today, while taking my dog out, I saw my neighbor finishing up the painting. Again, no heads up. My husband's concerned about this and wants to confront him, while I'm on the fence about it. To complicate things, my neighbor's a sheriff. This makes us worry that he might be encroaching on our land without permission. After a long discussion, we decide to have a professional surveyor come out and confirm the exact property line. Sure enough, the survey revealed that the fence actually extended a few feet onto our property. We approached our neighbor with the survey results and politely but firmly pointed out the trespassing and the encroachment. At first he was defensive, claiming he had no idea about the property lines. However, when we showed him the survey and explained our discomfort with him coming onto our property without permission, he finally agreed to have a proper discussion. After some negotiation, our neighbor agreed to move the fence back to the correct property line and apologize for the intrusion. We also came to an agreement that any future work requiring access to our property would involve prior notification and permission. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.